I have myself Shiva. I'm a senior strategist at Speero, and I'm excited for my first guest for my new TV show, YouTube series, whatever you want to call it. I have Rommil Santiago. I'm pretty sure I pronounced that right.
Yeah, Rommil.
Rommil. Perfect. Um, I just want to jump into this. Rommil, you and I have been talking a lot on LinkedIn. I love chatting with you, and I thought you were the perfect guest to talk about experimentation maturity, specifically. So tell me first of all, why should I even be talking to you? What makes you qualified to talk about experimentation maturity?
Frankly, I have no idea why you talk to me in general. Obviously, I'm kidding. Um, so yeah, I've been in the space through different roles over the last decade, as in growth, marketing, and product. And over the last 3 years, I've been at Loblaw Digital, which is the digital arm of Loblaw companies in Canada. And we're the largest retailer, so we've been running can I swear on the show?
Sure.
We've been running a shit ton of tests, just recently, we just hit 1,000 tests this year. So, that's a hell of an accomplishment for us. But, on top of that, I'm the founder of Experimentation, and we've worked together on countless podcasts.
Yep. And that's why I had to have you as my first guest on this show. So thank you for joining me. So the first thing that I've kind of been riffing about in my head, which I wanted to talk to you about, is just I don't think experimentation is well understood across a lot of people. Some people know bits and pieces of information. Some folks might see like, I know statistics. I read someone's blog post about button colors. Therefore, I know experimentation, right? Like we all, we've done all our 50,000 button color tests now, but we've all done the tests that are maybe low, high, whatever. But I don't think the true value of experimentation and really how to do experimentation and the value of experimentation is really broadcast throughout the world. And I do want to tie that a little bit later into why I think that limits the growth and the maturity of an experimentation program. But what do you think? Do you kind of tend to agree with that analysis?
So if I understand your question, is it that people are misunderstanding what test and learn is and why they're not embracing it?
Well, I think test to learn could be part of that, but it's more broadly that I think people don't necessarily approach experimentation in the exact best way possible.
Yeah.
So like one thing could be one of the clients I've been working with is they do a lot of feature validation rather than proactive feature exploration. And experimentation sometimes is just like it's a checkbox. Like
Yeah.
if we test it, okay, boom, let's move on. Which
100%.
can and should be used in that way. But there's also the feature.
They don't really, in my opinion, they don't really view, and this is a broad statement, obviously, because some obviously people do. There's a good number of folks that don't understand the power of experimentation in answering questions, in understanding problem spaces. Often at times they'll do qualitative research, do competitor analysis, and they think that's the way to do it. We have data, when in fact that's not real data. It's just a starting point for exploration. So it's often, yes, it's viewed as a checkbox. My thing did a thing. That's nice. But what ends up happening there is they're not optimizing to the full potential of their product or their campaign. So what I think a lot of folks don't understand is that experimentation can help you understand a space more, find relationships they would never have discovered in the past. And once they start thinking about, I'm not 100% certain about my belief much earlier, I can test this and validate this before I invest sprints in building a thing. Then they start unlocking, some of the mental barriers, and they start thinking, okay, well, I can build a small thing, validate my learning, and then build from there. But that takes a while, right? Usually an experimentation program comes in halfway through a year or something like that.
Yeah.
And folks are already dedicated to a timeline or a roadmap. So it's hard to change that method of working. I know it's a bit of a ramble, but that's the gist.
Well, especially if you're like midway through a research project, if the ship's already sailed, experimentation is often like, well, even if the smartest people who want to use experimentation, they're like, we can't necessarily proactively test something if we're already halfway through building it. So let's leverage it to just do a checkbox, which is great. And I think there should be times and opportunities where experimentation should be used to validate. But I do like the flip side of that, which is kind of the exploration. And I think, what do you think about like experimentation kind of being another leg of research because I think
Oh yeah.
experimentation and research are so closely tied together, and that potentially maybe one of the limiting principles of scaling an experimentation program is that you have experimentation and then you have research. And if they're not, it's not to say that they're not talking together. Like it shouldn't be a one-way street. It should be a deep connective tissue that these two are so deeply ingrained. And then if it's just like a one-way street, then you're not unlocking the full potential.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Um, in many companies, when they think research, they don't think experimentation, and that's a challenge that we faced where I am at now. In the past, you know, they want to learn about a space, they reach out to the research team, they do the research team. But now, it's something where we're having these open conversations about proving the stuff that they find through qualitative or stuff like that. That's really an untapped opportunity a lot of times where if they find some information from a set of interviews or a set of user tests, then you can literally run a test on production or something like that to
Yep.
validate this finding, right? And then when research presents their research, you can validate it with tests that have been run and it becomes very strong. And both sides can promote each other and share the same message across the company. So it's like super powering research, really. And then it's weird because experimentation is this validation thing. It's a research thing. It's a, you know, maximize. It does many things. It's a tool that a lot of teams use, including research.
Yeah. And I think you totally agree with this. Like experimentation and research is almost just this, it's a cycle where they're
Yeah,
constantly just going back and forth, back and forth.
they feed each other, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they come up with a finding, we validate it, which is a little bit weird to them. They research more into that, and it's just this flywheel that's pretty amazing. The only sucky thing about that is we're all very geeky about this and really into it, and we don't have the time to really deep dive. But yeah, it's really cool to see it go.
Yeah. See, so you talk about time, and I'm trying to think about like my head is at what is limiting the growth of an experimentation program. So I think there's always going to be like we have these four pillars in our experimentation maturity kind of product, which is like strategy and culture, process and governance, people and skills, data and tools. And like you pick any one of these and you're like, yeah, if you don't give enough juice, manpower, resourcing, whatever to this specific avenue, you're going to limit it. Um, I think specifically with that, what do you think resonates more with you? Is it more people and process for you particularly that you think, I'm sorry, not people process. I don't think process and governance is probably something that is limiting you at this point. But for me, the limitation I've tended to hit more often than not with scaling, at least in the early stages, is more in the people and skills, just due to lack of um like time for me to like be able to dedicate. I'm a single person, and I think I just wrote a post about this, but like I'm a one-man team trying to be the developer, the designer, the program manager, the strategist, all these things. What's your general reaction to that?
Oh, I definitely relate. In previous roles, you know, I feel it.
Yeah.
You're the one person. It's interesting that you brought up like what is the biggest roadblock. I've seen several programs start up, luckily, in my history. And while I believe that the time to train and find talent is a challenge, I think I view time from a different perspective. I think it's the time that you have with with the champion, with the person that sponsored you, with the investor or
Yeah.
the top manager. That's the time I focus on the most because they want an ROI on their investment. Um, so we need to find ways to show them progress and ROI on their investment as soon as possible,
Yeah.
right? So I'm kind of going to tangent here, but this is kind of a big reason in my experience when I try to stand things up is that we try to find those low hanging fruit. And I don't love cliches and all that, but doing that you can show that there's value to what you're doing. You could test all the pipes of communication and development, trying to work all the kinks out. And that shows and encourages people to participate more. If you
Mhm.
start off with something highly strategic, time is burning, you know,
Yep.
the patience of your stakeholders, your higher ups, will run out. It will run out for sure. So I view time differently, but in towards your point, I think in that short amount of time, not only do you have to show progress, you have to show or try to get those teams along with you and get cooperation across the board.
Yeah. And that kind of ties a little bit back into the previous point about like education, that if you're quickly not only having a quick test win, but you're almost educating the value of experimentation quickly by hitting that quick ROI win.
Yeah.
I know you know how much I hate the word best practice, but it's almost a best practice to target those low hanging fruit opportunities.
Yeah, I know. It's ironic.
But I totally agree. Like every program I started with, it's like, you look at a prioritization framework, which you could definitely geek out about probably in its own separate session. But like a prioritization framework, the things that should bubble up very quickly is like, what can I build very quickly? What has a crap ton of research backing it?
Yeah.
What has a lot of eyes so you can reach statistical significance quicker? Like prioritize that low hanging fruit as quickly as possible, because you're ideally getting an insight as we talk about test to learn, or you're getting a win, like an actual revenue driving win quickly. So then you're educating, and leaders are like, oh, one test, one win. Holy crap, it lifted conversion rate by 7%.
And let's invest more in Shiva. That's the goal, right? I mean,
that's a good motto.
Buying more time. That's all you're trying to do. You're given some time. You try to maximize that time, show value to buy more time.
Yep. Agreed. So maybe that's a good tangent to talk a little bit about test to learn. I know we kind of towed into it a little bit, but I want to ask you this question and I'll ask this and then I just want to hear your general reactions and thoughts. So test to learn, incredibly important, right?
Yep.
I think a lot of, practitioners focus on, let me quickly talk about what is test to learn. Test to learn is effectively running a program that, whether the result is that it quote unquote wins in revenue, conversion rate, whatever other KPIs you're kind of optimizing for, or if it decreases and doesn't hit those revenue, conversion rate, whatever, you're still generating an insight so that your next test it's basically its own little contained research pod that you then use to inform on the next test and the next test. So I think you and I are pretty passionate about test to learn, but specifically, what do you think is the value of test to learn in scaling an experimentation program? Or let me say differently. What do you think is the detriment in not doing test to learn to scaling an experimentation program?
That is a great question. I actually thought about that very recently. I think it ties back to the concept of time. Eventually, you will run a test that loses, if not right away, right?
Really?
No, that never happens to me. So the way I view scaling up a program is that you're going to do some kind of like weird things at the beginning. You're going to pick the really low fruit, the really slam dunks. You're going to highlight the wins and the revenue you potentially go, which is really all not the best practice. It's not test to learn. It's just test to make money, which is what the ultimate goal is, but you're trying to tease them, right? Having that test to learn mentality throughout though, enables you to shift away from that early stage of showing wins and revenue, which will buy you time because you're telling people not only will you make money, you will learn things that eventually make you money later on.
Yep.
So I think that's all very intertwined. Testing to learn will get you away from, folks asking you run more tests and just for cheap vanity metrics. It gets towards generate more learnings, right? But if you start at the beginning and say, we're going to test to learn, in my opinion, most people who are investing in you will go, you're just trying to stall. You don't know what you're doing,
Yeah.
So it's kind of a fine balance where I'm going to show you some wins and some dollars, but we're going to talk about test to learn. And then as you get out of the first few tests, then you start shifting that mentality to test to learn and get people, oh, I could get money and learnings and we could go faster and make more money. And then you start the flywheel. So it's this cold start problem.
Yeah. I think to that point about learning, you kind of mentioned it, but like when you have a test and it loses, executives might see that and be like, oh, so it lost. So we just lost money by doing this. And I think sometimes it's viewed as a cop out to be like, well, we learned something. But sometimes you have to focus on, I think with every test that I run, win or lose, I focus on what we learned first. And then I talk about the results. And I think I do that across every test because I think it's important. Like we talked about education. And I think that's a theme that I'm going to keep on hitting home for me personally. is
Yeah.
like you're educating and kind of, I want to say like you're training a dog because that's a really crappy example. And I'm not trying to
Well,
call executives dogs,
the
but
cute,
like
friendly dog that we all love.
I'm also training my dog. That's why I think I have that at the top of my mind. But I digress. You're almost training the executives to, instead of be fixed, if you immediately go with, hey, this test, when you're talking about low hanging fruit, if you this test one, increase conversion rate by X, Y, Z, you're almost training them to like, all right, next test, where's the money? Next test, where's the money? Next test,
Got
where's
it.
the money? Instead, it's refactoring it to be like, hey, in this test, we've learned that this experience works and we learned X, Y, and Z. As a result of that, we gained X in dollars, Y in revenue, whatever it may be,
Yeah.
those other KPIs. What do you think? Do you think that's an appropriate strategy for helping?
I hedge my bets. I hedge my bets. So not only do you share that learning and you still show the revenue because they're going to ask, um, not everyone in the room is going to be the same maturity of understanding all this stuff. So you always have to talk about the dollars, and they may view a losing test as bad. What I like to show is a loss aversion. You know, it's like you put out something. We found out that if you had rolled this out to 100% to all your stores, whatever, what have you, you would have lost $1,000,000. We just
Yeah,
saved you $1,000,000. That's what
yeah.
I'm talking about. Uh, yeah, $1,000.
I love
Yeah,
that framing. I love that.
it's always the loss aversion. So I find that in startups, they're like, oh, let's try everything. So they're a little bit, less caring about taking risks. But the bigger you get, the more at stake there is. So they're fairly more risk averse than startups. So when you go to a larger company or someone with a lot of revenue, highlighting what the risk you averted is key. We did the experimentation not only becomes a research tool and a validation tool, we are a risk aversion tool. We will save you money.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's a tool to help you make better decisions, just like research is a tool to help you make better
exactly.
decisions, informed decisions, data-driven decisions, 100%. Don't disagree with anything you said. And I think that framing is pretty powerful. For a losing test to say, if we just did it, we would have lost so much money, especially for those tests that like maybe your boss's boss decided we really need to do this.
Yeah.
You could say, hey, well, let's test it. I don't want to test it. Hey, let's test it. Hey,
Test it.
tested it. We tested it, and good thing we tested it because it would have lost us.
But it's, sometimes there's strategic reasons you push a losing test, particularly in product where it can enable something in the future,
Sure.
but you need to know that you lost something so that you have, the baseline of what you have to make up. And that's what a lot of folks forget. We at the very least, validation and measuring the impact of your work tells you where you are at in terms of a baseline and what you have to do to move forward. If you didn't know you lost 5 percentage points, you're figuring my work did nothing, but it's really because your floor fell.
Well, that helps with ROI. So like the ROI of this is, yeah, we lost -5%, but we gained efficiency in X, Y, and Z.
Exactly. Yeah.
Therefore, this is a net positive, and we did the calculation.
And that's really a really important part of the story, right? Like, don't just focus on the dollars. Think about the entire system, all the stakeholders, your customer service, your satisfaction. There's so many dimensions that you should look at as well beyond just the dollar.
Yep. Cool. I love it. I think we're wrapping up right here. The last question I want to ask you, reflecting back, what do you think is one of the biggest takeaways, lessons learned that you've like, what is your biggest lesson or takeaway from growing an experimentation program? They're like, damn, I wish I figured that out, but I test to learn growing an experimentation program. And this is the lesson I've learned for growing an experimentation program moving forward.
I don't know if it's the best lesson, but it's the first one that comes to my mind.
Okay.
Tailoring your message to your stakeholders. For me, like it's end of year. That's why I'm thinking about it. When you talk to the folks who are building the product, you could get into details and the weeds and stuff, but the higher you go up, you need to only give them information to help them make a decision. They're so busy that it's like, this will save you money. This will improve efficiency. And then they can make a decision. Once you start throwing in every single minutia in there, it's distracting. It's like bike shedding, if you ever heard that, where you distract people with a thing that doesn't really matter and they start focusing on the color of the bike shed. Who cares? That's not what we're worrying about. So tailoring your communication to the audience has really helped me in my career. It's more detailed with the teams are working on the actual test. And then the higher you go up, it gets more and more refined down to almost like 2 bullet points, saved time, saved money, good to go.
Yeah. I mean, that's powerful, right? And I think so to put that practically, if you're presenting to like a senior executive, you're not going to show them a spreadsheet like, this is what happened. You're going to take like the data, you're going to consolidate it to like the story. And even then, sometimes with senior executives, I don't even really show numbers. I don't say the percent lift. I just say like for senior leaders, like it won pretty big. And this is what we're going to do. And here's a pretty picture for what it looked like.
Yeah, 100%. You're definitely not bringing any P values or confidence intervals, because then you get into the question of what's that? And then you're going, oh boy.
Yeah, I have this running joke of like, if other coworkers hear you talking about P values, HR will walk by and be like, "Did I need to report this person for talking about P values?"
Oh yeah. I never thought of it that way. But yeah, that's an interesting observation.
Yeah, just tailor your talks to your audience. You don't want to talk about P values to HR because I don't think it'll go over well.
That's fair.
Well,
that's fair.
Thank you again, Rommil. This was a nice conversation. I'm definitely going to have you on at some point in the near future. Any stuff you want to plug?
Yeah, Loblaw Digital, where I work, we're hiring. We're the largest retailer in Canada. We're growing like I'm not gonna put swear words in here, but we're growing a lot.
You already sweared dollars on your mind.
I was gonna say like a mofo, but seriously, if you're into tech and you want to impact lives of Canadians, check us out. We're at loblawdigital.co.
And I'd also say, you didn't plug it, but Experimentation has been growing as well. Something I love having you get to connect with a bunch of other like-minded geeks. Love it. It's a great community. Go join that as well. And from my side, there's an experimentation maturity audit work that we've been doing. We talked a little bit about how to get better at experimentation maturity. So if you want to take a quick quiz to figure out where you rank and talk to me, talk to some other Speero folks to help you get better at experimentation, go ahead and check out the survey and contact us.
It's a great tool. You folks should check it out.
Thank you so much for taking the time, Rommil. Really appreciate it.